When people say, what's the best thing that ever happened to you? You would think of something that is a shining moment in your life. When I tell you that when people would ask, what's the best thing that ever happened to me? It was having an addiction and going through the process of recovery. It gave me a whole different way to live that I never would have accessed had I not had an addiction. And I believe that about any hard thing that happens in your life. It does not take away the pain and the terrible part of it, but if you can walk through that, I believe that you can unlock a life on the other side that is totally different than what is accessible to you if you never deal with that type of thing. But you have to walk through it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Living Fully podcast. I am so excited to do this episode for you guys today. And I'm really excited because you guys were involved in this episode that I'm doing today. So a few weeks back, I did a Q&A box on my Instagram, and I asked if anyone had any questions on like recovery, or, if you had someone in your family that was dealing with addiction, or just like struggling with something kind of in that realm. Do you have any questions or like thoughts about that you'd want me to discuss on a podcast? Being that I am 10 years in recovery, and I think that even if you're not a person that deals with this, I think that people deal with addictive behaviors in other aspects of their life as well. So I think that this can apply to you, whether you are dealing with it or whether you're dealing with it in another realm, or whether you are just existing in the world, because I don't know a single person on the face of the earth that doesn't know someone that knows someone in recovery, or that needs to be in recovery, or that is just struggling with substances or behaviors or whatever that may be. So what we did was we compiled a list of questions that you guys asked, and I'm going to go through those today. And I think they're great conversation starters. I'll share a lot of my experience just being in it 10 years, but also some of the wisdom that I learned from people who have been in the world of recovery for 50 years. Some of the wisest people that I've ever heard speak, that I've ever been around, are the people that have struggled the most in life. And a lot of those people I met in the rooms of recovery. So I'm really grateful to have a lot of that wisdom kind of in my brain, just like everything that I've kind of been through myself. And I'm really excited to bring that to you guys today. So question number one, we kind of compiled these two if there were several people that asked the same question, and this question was asked over and over. So question number one was, do you struggle with achieving? So why this has to do with recovery is I honestly feel like there are things that lead us into addictive behaviors. And that thing for me was perfectionism and an addiction to achievement. That was the addiction that I had before I struggled with substances, which if you're just listening to this podcast for the first time, I'm in recovery for 10 years from a couple prescription medications that took me down a really, really dark spiral in my life that sent me to a treatment center that I spent about 5.5 months in 2014. And my life on the other side is really incredible and amazing. And being in recovery and having to deal with this addiction was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And so going back to that question on achievement. So I, grew up on this farm with all my first cousins. I was the oldest of this really big group of kids that all grew up together, and not only my siblings, but all of my cousins as well. So I think that innately I wanted to be a good example, and I was a natural role model. I also had the talent of singing. So, I was on a lot of stages, and I was, a little star in our community, and people were really proud of me from a really young age. And I loved that people were proud of the things that I was doing, and I loved being an example, a positive example to all the children that were growing up around me that were younger than me. And so it didn't really become a thing that crippled me until later in life. So, I had a really great childhood, and even though I was achieving at 100 miles an hour, it wasn't something that I feel like was a crutch or a problem, but it was something that became a part of the DNA of who I am. So fast forward a little bit, I get through college and everything's going great. and no substance use at all. I actually didn't even, drink alcohol, not a single time, until like I was at the very end of college. This wasn't something that like I struggled with as a young person. It was really something that happened to me in my 20s. So when I became Miss Kentucky in 2009, I think that is when things really started to shift for me. And achieving something like that is such a big goal in your early 20s, I think can mess with your mind a little bit if you have an addictive personality. So, after my year as Miss Kentucky, and I was runner-up in Miss America, then I went on to do multiple seasons of The Amazing Race. So within the year of 2010, you want to talk about achieving and being addicted to achieving. I was Miss Kentucky, then runner-up in Miss America. Then I did one season of Amazing Race, and we got a phone call back to come back and do an all-star season. I mean, this is literally within 1 year of my life. And I was a young person who I don't think, really knew who I was and at my core just yet. I certainly was proud of the person that I was and the things that I was achieving. And I was a really great role model, I think, for my state, an example. But were my feet on the ground of being okay in my skin without all of these things that I was achieving? Oh, Lord, no. And as I continued to achieve, I became more and more obsessed with achieving. And then the issue really happened when I stopped achieving and I felt that me without my achievements was nothing at all, was disappointing my family. I was disappointing myself. I was a person that people wouldn't want to be friends with or date or whatever. I was so attached to my achievements. And that is where my spiral began. And so the answer to that question is, do I struggle with achieving? I don't now as much as I did then because of what I learned going through recovery, because that was a real issue for me that was really tied to what eventually became my sobriety. I still think that I struggle a little bit with, working. I like to work and I love what I do and I like achieving in that space now. So I think I always have to keep a pulse on more and more and more, always in the back of my mind. But that's my answer to that question. Okay, so tips on being able to change your mindset about life. I believe that everyone is born with a particular brain. Everyone has a particular life that influences that brain and the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we think about the world, the way that we think about how we exist in the world, the things that we can do in the world, the things that we can't do in the world. And I think that is a really big part of who we are and how we exist in the world. And I think there are two types of people. I think that there is the type of person that stays in that mindset, and oftentimes that mindset can include a lot of negative things. You can have a lot of self-sabotaging thoughts and beliefs about yourself and your self-worth and your confidence and all of those things. And then there are those people who choose to change their story and their limiting beliefs on life. And maybe you are a person who tends to look at the glass half empty. There are some of those people that are like, I'm not going to live like this. It is affecting the way that I exist in the world. It affects the way that I parent and I am as a spouse. And I'm going to change that. And do you know what I believe? I believe very strongly. There are like maybe a top 5, sets of beliefs that I really have. This is in my top 5 sets of beliefs. I believe that you have the power to change your mindset. And I believe if you can change your mindset, you can change your life. And I think that it is an ongoing thing. And it is something that you continuously have to keep a pulse on. But I truly believe that neuroplasticity is absolutely scientifically proven a real thing. That is the ability of your brain to change. And I believe that if you are a person who has a mindset that tends to lend itself toward the negative, or that thinks badly about yourself or the things that you can do in life or in the world, that you can absolutely change that. Do I think that it's super easy to change that? No, but it is way harder to live that way for the rest of your life. So I think that mindset is something that, we focus on our bodies and getting in shape for the summer, or we focus on our hair and We focus on our clothes and so many things on the outside. But I think that if there's one thing that you could change in your life that would really change your situation the most, it would be your mindset. And I also think, since we are talking about addiction, I believe that negative thinking can become an addiction to a lot of people. I think that it is habitual, that people have a habit of thinking negatively, but I also think that it can become ingrained in the person that you are, and you can almost become addicted to complaining and talking to people about all the bad things that are going on in your life, and worry and angst, and then it just becomes your go-to. And guess what? Your brain recognizes that as your go-to, and it automatically goes there. So I believe shifting your mindset is a really powerful thing, and there are a lot of different ways to shift your mindset. Someone that I really love to listen to that talks a lot about mindset shifts and neuroplasticity in general is Tara Swart. She is a doctor, and she came from the field of psychology, but then she started noticing in all of these cases that she was working with these people. She was like, there is something that people are not talking about enough, and that is the ability of the brain to change. And she talks a lot about, she has like 5 different kind of steps. She also believes a lot in visualization and positive thinking, and she backs it by science. So I'll link some of her content below if you want to kind of go down that rabbit hole. I listen to and consume a lot of information about mindset shifts, because even me, I'm a positive thinker. Whenever I wake up in the morning, I feel very good. I feel a lot of joy. We have situational things that will send me on a spiral, of course, because that is life. But I generally have always been a positive thinking person. Now, when I was in active addiction, I was a very severely negative thinking person. I felt a lot of sadness and loneliness and a lot of anxiety around a lot of things, but a lot of that was induced by the medication that I was taking. So I have certainly not only automatically been a glass half full kind of person that I am now, and I think that if we're talking about addiction today on this podcast, I would be amiss to say if you are dealing with something like an addiction or a behavioral thing, that is the first thing that I would remove in order to shift your mindset, because you're living under a cloud. So that is the answer to changing my mindset about life. Okay, this is a great question. So someone asked, how do I support a loved one that is in the recovery process? And they asked, how did my loved ones support me? So we were a family who had never dealt with anyone going to treatment. There was no one that was quote unquote like sober in my family, and we didn't really know anyone that had been through that. And so when I started showing signs of needing help, and my mom was really the one that stepped in and helped me, because she could just see that like I was alive, of course, and like walking the earth, but I had lost every part of who I was. She could tell like there were some things that were going on, even though she didn't physically see me taking the medication that I was taking in doses that I should not have been taking. They could see me, maybe drinking excessively, or they could just see that I was a totally different person. And I was around them. There was this one, kind of pain point thing that happened where I was at home and they saw it and they were like, there's an issue here. They took away the keys to my car. I had no way of leaving their house, and they just started calling people and looking up places online and figuring out, how do I save my child? So that's the first way that my family showed up for me. They stepped in, and even though we didn't have any knowledge about recovery, they figured it out. And I think that the world of recovery is intimidating to a lot of people that don't have anyone close to them that have been through like a treatment program, but it's also intimidating because it is a big financial cost. And a lot of people are like, there is no way we could afford to send a loved one to treatment. I was lucky that my parents covered the cost of that and that they were able to, and that's a huge blessing. But people get sober in the rooms of AA and NA, and people get sober with church counselors and therapists, and in all different ways that are lower costs or free. There are also a lot of like financial aid programs too in recovery. So my parents, they supported me by sending me there and covering the cost because I had literally no money at the time. I couldn't have sent myself there, and I wouldn't have just walked into the doors of a treatment center. When you're at that point in active addiction, you're so delusional about your situation, and it is a medical disease. Like, I was so addicted that I could not just cold turkey choose to stop doing what I was doing. I had tried that so many times, and I always went back to it. And so my family really went into this not knowing anything about it, and how they really showed up for me is they came curious. They came open-minded and curious. They didn't blame me for what I was going through and just say, you've been given all this stuff, and, we have done all of this for you in your life. Like, how are you going to do this to us? I already felt so much heavy shame myself, and if they would have taken that approach, that would have been really, really hard for me. But I got nothing from my family but love and support and curiosity for them about what can we do as a family to support a loved one in recovery. And we had family programs that they all went to while I was there in treatment. They learned a lot of stuff. And there are a lot of things that family members can do to support a loved one in recovery that are really part of the process that we learned. Something that you have to do, there's a piece of recovery that's really hard. That is this tough love piece, where if you continue to enable an addict in your home, like my dad would have not made me go to treatment. My mom was kind of like, she has to go or she's going to die, which I would have. And my dad, he just is like a lot of people's parents, where you just love your child so much and you think they can push through, and you just want to kind of keep them under your wing and make things easier. And enabling is a classic way to allow an addict or an alcoholic or whatever behavior that someone is fallen into to continue down their road. And ultimately, that road sometimes does not lead to recovery like mine did. It leads somewhere much worse than that. So I think that as a family member supporting someone in recovery, it is important to give them, like, if you continue down this road, this is what we're going to have to do as a family. Like, you don't want to push the person in recovery out, but you also cannot allow them to continue that. You want to encourage them to get help and support, and sometimes you have to put some firm lines and boundaries in place. So that's really hard to do, especially if you really love your family member, which most people do. But, my loved ones supported me in a lot of ways. And my extended family also really supported me. Like I said, I was the first family member to go through this, and my family is an achieving family who has a lot to be proud of, but there aren't too many stories from my family about people sharing their story in the middle of a crisis without like the shiny, happy ending. And I had to share with my family, all my cousins and my aunts and uncles and how close we are. We all grew up together on the same farm, about my story of what I was going through in the middle of treatment while I was in the middle of it. And it was the first time that someone in our family had kind of done that. And it was really cool because my family was like, how can we help you? Like, how can we be as a family? It's not like every one of them was just going to be cold turkey sober. Like, they didn't have issues with what I had issues with. They didn't need to do that. But they asked me a lot of questions. But I just felt overwhelming love and support. And even when they didn't understand, like curiosity. And I felt that my family supported me by not placing any more shame on me, because I was already feeling so much guilt and shame myself just from what I felt about disappointing myself. So that is how I would give a suggestion to someone that's trying to support someone in recovery. And then getting your own help, I think, is great too, because you being in therapy or having someone to talk to is also really important, because it's really, really, really hard to have a person that is in recovery or that's in active addiction, because I think it's so frustrating for those people, because it's like, why do I have to deal with this? I'm not even making these bad decisions and these choices myself. So anyways, what I would also say to encourage you is, if your family member makes it to the other side and lives a life in recovery, it is really an incredible person that you're going to get, a person that can really stand on their 2 feet, that's grounded, that's really rich with life experience and wisdom. And if you're listening to this podcast, because all of us on earth know some of the people that have walked through the fire are the people that are the wisest and the best to be around. So support them, and hopefully they get to the other side. Tips on pushing through the hardest days. So in my recovery journey, I would say top hardest days were the end of active addiction, because there's so much unknown. You're so teetering on the edge of sometimes life and death. And it seems like the largest, most unending mountain to climb to think about getting sober. There was nothing in my body that could have stopped doing what I was doing. And it feels so unbelievably intimidating. And it feels truly impossible to think about doing that on your own. And tips on getting through those days that were hard is reach out for help, because you can literally not do it on your own. Some of my hardest days also were early in treatment, because early recovery, getting sober, it is the piece of like withdrawal from that substance was really hard. So having people around you, medical even people around you, if you have the ability to do that, is going to help on those hard days. And then I would say, thirdly, the harder days, like I'm 10 years sober now. And I would say the hard days for me now are when I feel like I'm going through a hard time in my life and I have no outlet that everyone else does to just like zhuzh over it and be like, gosh, I just wish I could stop thinking about this for a while. Or, you wish you could have a glass of wine, or you wish you could do what everyone else does sometimes. And, they say in recovery, like, you're not supposed to think like that. Well, maybe, the reality is sometimes your mind does go there in recovery, and you feel a little bit sorry for yourself. So those hard days, I reach out for help, or I do something that they say in recovery, which is play the tape. I remember that one glass of wine doesn't lead to feeling better about a situation and make things all okay. I remember that one glass of wine, or taking sleeping pills, or whatever it is that is your drug of choice, leads down a spiral that would take me right back to a treatment center. So just remembering the reality, not glamorizing the good parts of the thing that you became addicted to, but remembering the reality of the situation. That helps me on the hardest days now. I also am a very, very strong person of faith, and I pray all day, every day, and I truly do not have the desire. Like I said, sometimes, very, very rarely, I'll feel a little bit sorry for myself, but I never have the desire to pick up a prescription medication that I took before. And I don't even really have the desire to drink alcohol. I just feel sometimes like, gosh, must be nice, when other people are dealing with a problem and they have that outlet, but their outlet is certainly not like my outlet, and their one glass of wine leads to a different place than mine would. So that helps me on the hardest days. And faith. Okay. How did you know it was time for treatment? I felt very hopeless at the end of my journey with addiction, but I still didn't really know it was time for treatment. The people on the outside saw that it was time for treatment for me, and I don't think I really knew it was time for treatment until I went to the treatment center and I started hearing the stories of people who were a lot like me, because I thought to myself, well, I've done all these things and the medication that I'm taking isn't an illegal substance. And, I tried to disqualify myself from needing to be in that place. And I knew I was in the right place, I'll say, when I was maybe 5 or 6 days in. And I started hearing from the pharmacist that was there, that was a high achiever, that was also, doing the same thing, or the people whose stories were like mine that certainly belonged there. That's when I knew. And then also, like, when you start to get sober, even if you're a person that feels like you're just relying on it a little too much, I would encourage you to try and do without it for a little bit and feel your brain and your spirit start to wake up and come alive again after you get out from under that cloud of relying on, joy that's chemically manufactured, or sleep that's chemically manufactured, or energy that's chemically manufactured. I would say that I really knew it. I was in the right place in that treatment center when I started to feel myself come back into my body. Because that's the reality of it. That's what happens. And so, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, going to that treatment center. And I'm really lucky that someone else forced me into it, because I don't know if I would have ever gotten to the point where I thought it was time for treatment on my own. Okay, this is a great question. How do I feel today on the other side? Sorry, taking a drink of this Fiji water. I know you see it if you're watching it, but how do I feel on the other side? I think that when I look back at my life of a lot of years, I would have thought that when people say, what's the best thing that ever happened to you? It's like, you would think of something that is a positive, good, shiny moment in your life. When I tell you that when people would ask, what's the best thing that ever happened to me? It was having an addiction and going through the process of recovery, because it gave me a whole different way to live that I never would have accessed had I not had an addiction, and something that I almost lost my life to. And I believe that about any hard thing that happens in your life. It does not take away the pain and the terrible part of it, but if you can walk through that, I believe that you can unlock a life on the other side that is totally different than what is accessible to you if you never deal with that type of thing. But you have to walk through it. And so I think that my life on the other side is certainly brighter, and I'm sober. So, I don't have all the issues that I had from being in active addiction and all the things that come with that. But it's also just so much richer and more beautiful and vibrant, and I'm not afraid of the lows, and the highs are so much higher, and I feel really, really grateful on the other side that I was born a person with an addictive personality that ended up in this spot, because it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so much can be gained from being in recovery. So that is how I feel on the other side. And I also feel like God gave me a platform, and I'm able to show up every day and show you all of these amazing things around me in my life, where we're building a house or having a baby or packing for a vacation. And you can remember when you look at me doing all of those things that seem fun and cool, that I am actually like a face of addiction. And I can take away the stigma that it only looks like another person. Because the reality is, it looks like me too. So if you're a person that looks like me, or has part of the life that I have, or, has 3 young kids, or did come from a really amazing family and was a really good kid, that you can also end up in this spot. And life feels really awesome on the other side because I'm able to represent that. And I believe that platforms are great for so many reasons. Yeah, you can support your family, and it can become a career, and it can do all these things. But it can also be something that is the final straw that can push somebody over the edge to, you know what, I have an issue, I can get help. She did too. So I feel grateful for that on the other side too. Okay, what phase of life were you in active addiction? It was kind of a slow burn for me. I would say like right around the time that I was Miss Kentucky, that's when my life really got to going 100 miles an hour. And I was prescribed the medication that I did not need because I didn't have a condition for. And then I very slowly over time, but also kind of quickly at the same time, started taking more and more and more, needing more and more and more, and then becoming dependent on it. So mid-20s. And this period was only about like 4 or 5 years of my life, or 4 years of my life, that I was going through that. And then I got sober in my 20s also, too, which is so wild to say, that I started all of this and I got sober from all of it in my 20s. I think a lot of people in their 20s are just kind of like figuring themselves out and just walking along the sidewalk of life. And, I really got tossed into some big stuff in my 20s, and I'm really grateful for that, because it ushered me into truly figuring out who I was and what I wanted, and being okay with who I was at the core of everything. How do you have the courage to not go back? I think I answered that question earlier with playing the tape. Y'all, I was born a person that loved life and was happy and was given so many amazing gifts from God to do all the things that are good in the world. And that was the path that I was always on. Drugs and alcohol destroyed my life, but then handed it right back to me. And I believe that if I can constantly remember the person that I am at my core, remember how my addictive behaviors brought me to a person that I didn't even know, and the worst version of myself, and the worst version of my amazing life, that it's really easy to not fall back in. It's that playing the tape. It's remembering. And also I want to speak to maybe the woman that's listening to this that feels like, yeah, I don't have a problem. Okay. Maybe you do not have a problem. And I believe you if you think you don't have a problem. But what are you giving up to that 3 glasses or that 2 glasses of wine every night? Are you not working through a problem that you continue to push under the rug? Are you detaching yourself from your children because they're stressing you out instead of trying to be more present and do the harder thing of getting on the floor and playing with them? Is there something in your marriage that you feel like, you know what, I do not want to walk this uphill battle to figure this out? So when you start to have an argument, you just drown the feelings out with alcohol. Here's what I want to challenge you with. Even though you are not addicted to this substance, are you addicted to the way that this substance is making you feel? And what are you sacrificing for that? Because what I know from being in recovery is that walking through those things that are tough, because I had to walk through every single tough thing in my life over and over and over. I had to walk through like issues that I had with myself, attachment to my appearance. I had to walk through perfectionism. I had to walk all these things over and over and over. And they taught me so much, and I'm so much better on the other side. I'm so much better on the other side. So many people, and I say this so many times, they want to avoid the pain constantly of the thing. Okay? Here's what I want to challenge you to do today and every single day of your life. Be more afraid of missing out on a life than you are to experience pain within it. I say it over and over, and I will say it again. Be more afraid of missing out on living a full life than experiencing pain within it. Walk through the pain. What you will get to on the other side is so much greater and better. And that pain is a drop in the bucket compared to what you're going to get on the other side. So I don't even remember what the question was, but that is how I have the courage to not fall back in. And that is what I want to say to the woman who continues to fall back in, that's not necessarily addicted, but is reliant on a substance or a behavior. I want to challenge you today to try. What it's all trendy now, mocktails and being sober curious. Be sober curious, but also be like, hey, I'm living a full life curious. I'm a person that wants to know what it would feel like to actually experience my emotions and to walk through them and to work through the things that I've been covering up for 20 years. That's what I would challenge you to do. And that's how I don't fall back in as I play the tape, because it almost killed me. How you cannot fall back in is being curious about what's on the other side. How do you handle being in an environment with friends and family who are not sober? If you are truly in recovery in a strong and good way, you will not be bothered by friends and family who are not in recovery that are around you. There are times when I feel alone in a room where everyone is drinking, and especially when everybody gets drunk, because I'm just like, okay, I'm talking to a person that's not even going to remember this tomorrow, and you kind of feel like the only person in the room who's different. And I don't think I ever felt like that in my life until I became a sober person in a room of people that weren't. But I've never felt tempted to go back to it because my recovery is strong. And I spent a really long time in treatment, really digging to the bottom of my recovery. And I think that is how I do it. Now, here is something that I do believe, though. I do believe in early recovery. I think if I had only stayed in treatment for 30 days, I would have struggled because I didn't get to the bottom of all the stuff that was beneath just the sober part. And I will say, if you're a person who cannot go to treatment for some reason or has less support, you really do need the support of friends and family. And the number one thing that I would ask of a partner, or especially if you live in the same home with a person who is not sober, to get the substance or the alcohol out of your home. We, in the first 5 to 7 years of my recovery, we did not have alcohol in my home. No one ever has a bottle of Adderall or Ambien near me. It's not like I'm going to eat the whole thing like it's a thing of Pez because like I said, I play the tape. But I think that asking the people around you to not participate in the substance is a big ask. But I also think that if that's what you need, then you should make the ask. And you know what they always said to me in treatment, and I unfortunately think is true, that the people in your life who love you, that very easily say, okay, yeah, that's awesome. The people who cannot give that thing up for you, if you're really struggling and if they love you, also have an issue. That's what they always told us in treatment. They're like, if they can't give that up for you, then they probably have a problem themselves or on their way there. And that's, I'm not being judgmental, but I think that you need to ask for what you need. And what you need is different for different people in different stages of sobriety. So I think it also helps to have, if you're traditionally getting sober in the rooms of AA, to have a person that you can call that's like a sponsor or a friend, or removing yourself from a situation, or asking someone not to have that substance in your home, or just, say you're going to a wedding reception. You're not going to ask everybody at the wedding reception not to drink wine, but maybe the partner that's with you, that's supporting you in your recovery, you can be like, hey, do you have to drink tonight? Can you be my partner in this? And if you have a good partner in life, that person is going to say yes. And is going to be so happy to support you in that. How did you get back to the day-to-day monotony after addiction? Not having that fix. So the majority of our life is spent in the day-to-day. It is not the mountaintop moments, and hopefully it is not the lows. And when you get in recovery and back into the real world, if you're lucky enough to go to a treatment center, you're in a bubble. It is not the real world. As much as they want to bring you to the grocery store and to the AA meetings that are out in the local town of the recovery center, it is just simply not that. It is not the real world. So it is certainly a shock to get back into your real life without a substance, because you feel like you are raw and naked out in the world. That is the same world, but you feel totally different in. It is truly like a fish out of water, because you feel everything and you notice everything and you're sensitive to things. And then, like the question said, you don't have the fix that helped you with the energy, or helped you to go to sleep, or helped you to numb out the emotions that you didn't want to feel through the day. So that, I will say, is the most jarring part of recovery, and something that every single person going back into their real life feels across the board, and that you get used to. But then I will say, once you kind of get into the groove of feeling and being the fish out of water, you feel the emotions, and it feels good to feel again. It feels good to experience life again, and to notice and to be different in the world if you can get past the uncomfortability. Because like you just said in that question, the person that asked it, there is monotony in the day-to-day and going from one thing to the next in your life. And it is a lot different when you do not have something chemically manufactured any longer. You just have life. So I believe that that's something that you have to get used to, but then you will fall in love with eventually, hopefully, like I did. Oh, this is a good question. So how do you get to the point of forgiving yourself? I forgive myself for doing this. That is a really good question. And as a person who is sitting here talking to you, who struggles with disappointing people, you best believe that was a huge issue for me. And in fact, I had to look the other way oftentimes and not even think about some of the conversations that I had and some of the embarrassing things that I did and said that were so out of character for me that I did in active addiction. But part of forgiving yourself and part of asking for forgiveness from other people is part of what you'll go through if you go through a traditional 12-step recovery program, which I did in treatment. And it is a big part of the healing process. And it's a really big part of taking accountability for where this thing brought you and bringing people into it and remembering. And gosh, that's the hard part, but it is absolutely a necessary part to recovery. There was something that's part of what you do in a traditional recovery program that is called an impact letter that was really hard for my family to do. And some of my family members just didn't even do it right because they were I just can't do this. The ones that are more of the they're the tough love family members, they're the enabling family members, and they're the ones that just kind of want to look the other way and be I hope that she's okay, but I hate it that she has to go through this, and I don't want to face that she's going through this. Impact statements are from a sibling or a parent or whoever's closest to you that says what your addiction has done to them in your life. And I can still remember every word of those letters and how it had hurt the people that I really loved. And I read those letters sober. So it was really painful. And as a person that carries shame over doing anything wrong or disappointing anyone, it was really hard, and I can still remember a lot of those things today. But those are some of the things that keep me sober today, is remembering that it's playing the tape. Because I was a totally different person in my family, a totally different sibling and daughter and friend and girlfriend turned wife. And it's really hard to forgive yourself for a lot of those things, but it's part of the process. And part of what really helped me to forgive myself was to realize that, y'all, and I'm telling you this from being in the brain that was addicted, I do truly believe that addiction is a disease, that it is a medical disease. I believe that there is something off in my brain that made me go down this path. And if I just felt like it was my own free will making those bad decisions and doing those things that I was not proud of, I don't know if I would be able to forgive myself. So remembering that helps me to forgive myself. Also, the people around me forgiving me and being so proud of me in recovery and on the other side and part of my journey in recovery is a big part of forgiving myself too, because I knew they forgave me. I think that was the hardest part for me. Because I really just want to make people proud. And I really just wanted to continue to be a good example. But what I know now on the other side of it is I am a good example. Because now when my family is struggling with something or someone in my family is struggling with something, they come to me and they say, Mal, this is going on. Will you help? And I cannot count on all of my fingers and toes the amount of people that I've helped get into treatment centers or talked to about it. And that helps me forgive myself because I know I'm doing something good on the other side. How do you find contentment in recovery? Recovery is contentment to me. Recovery teaches you how to be content with life on life's terms better than anything else I've ever experienced in my life. So recovery didn't help me find contentment. Recovery is my contentment. Recovery ushers you into a life of contentment because you no longer have anything that helps when you are discontent. So you have to learn a way to live in a way that is content or find your way back to contentment when you are not content with parts of your life. So that's a very easy answer. This is the last answer that I'll do. How does your faith support you in recovery? So I did a podcast recently where my friend asked me, she said, is there ever a time in your life where that you questioned the existence of God? And I was like, absolutely not. I've always felt so blessed to feel such a strong connection to God that I have never questioned that one single time. But there have been times in my life, particularly times where I was really, really low in my active addiction, where I asked God some really big questions. And on the final days of my active addiction, when things got really dark for me, my faith was a really big part of that journey. And if you've read my book, you've heard this story, but I'll tell it really quickly again. But I lived on Music Row in Nashville, and the church that we went to, that we still go to today, was about 3 miles from our house, or 2 miles from our house. And I knew something was really off in my life. I knew that physically I could not sustain living anymore. I knew that my spirit was gone. I emotionally was totally strung out and spiraled out of control and just wrecked. But I did not know what to do. And I would say the rosary, which is a prayer that you say on rosary beads in the Catholic faith. And I would say a rosary on the way to running to this church. And I would just pray that God would just take it away from me. And I always thought that that would be the answer to my prayer, that one day I would wake up and I would feel no longer the pull to take a substance that I knew was ruining my life. But what I know today, and why my faith is the most integral part of my faith journey, is that my prayer was answered when I went to the day that I walked into March 26th or whatever day it was. I think it was March 26th in 2014. When I walked into that treatment center, that was my prayer being answered, because God gave me the greatest gift of my life in giving me the brain and the addictive personality that I had, having me get so deep into recovery that I almost lost my life to it, and then going through the 5.5 months that I spent in that treatment center, because he handed me a life that I never would have had. And so my faith was so big because, gosh, I prayed the strongest prayers, and he answered my prayer, but in a lot different of a way than I expected him to. And I certainly clung to my faith in treatment as I was learning to forgive myself, to release the shame, as I was being okay with this new version of myself that was so foreign to me and different from any way that I'd ever been before in my life. And I just clung to God and was just kind of like, I don't know what is going on, but like, just help me. Like, help me lean into what I need to lean into. Like, there were days where I wanted to leave, like, help me stay, because I knew I needed to be there. And then my faith now in my recovery journey is a lot different, because I don't have, like I've talked about so many times in this podcast, I don't have the outlet that a lot of people have to smooth over the things that happen as part of life. And the thing that I lean on is my faith. And I think that if there's one thing that you can become addicted to that is okay, well, I guess within certain bounds, is your faith. And I pray and I pray and I pray. And I visit that like I would back in my days of active addiction, something that was not good for me. And it is everything to me now. And it is so many different things to me in different times in my life. But I will say that I'm 100% sure that the Lord's hand orchestrated every single bit of my journey in recovery and every bit of my journey after, because I know that there's tens of thousands of people listening to me speak right now, whether you're in your car or you're on your treadmill trying to be your healthiest version of yourself for this life that you've been given, or you're making dinner for your family or for you and your roommate. And I know that I've been guided to talk about what I'm talking about today that you're listening to for some reason also. And I have faith that, we're where we're meant to be in our life. And I think that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be today, talking about what I went through 10 years ago and still do today. And I'm very grateful for that and for the opportunity to talk about that today. So I want to say thank you to every single person of the thousands of people that submitted questions, and for people that are curious about this for yourself, but also for people that are around you, because the reality is, in the world that we're living in today, it may not even be a substance. It may be something else that you feel like is just standing in your way, or someone that you love's way from living their fullest life. And I'm happy that I can be a voice of recovery, but also that I can be a voice of inspiration for people to live a life that is different on the other side of walking through something that's hard. So thank you so much for all your questions and for listening to this podcast and for, walking with me through recovery over and over and listening to my story. And I hope it's been a help to you today or to you that's trying to help someone else in your life today. And thank you so much for listening to the Living Fully podcast today. Tune in next week for more.